It's my honor today to be here to talk with Meredith Harper. Meredith serves as the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at the Eli Lilly and Company here in Indiana, and she's responsible for the company's Global Information Security Program. Prior to joining Lilly in 2018 as Senior Director and Deputy Chief Information Security Officer, Meredith served as Chief Information Privacy and Security Officer at the Henry Ford Health System, where she had ultimate responsibility for the protection of Henry Ford's provider, insurance, retail, and research businesses. She earned a master's degree in health services administration and a bachelor's degree in computer information systems from the University of Detroit Mercy. She has also earned a master's of jurisprudence in health law from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. Meredith serves on several advisory boards in support of empowering women and minorities to embark upon careers in technology, especially in information security. She has also served her community for 29 years through her Diamond Life membership in Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Meredith, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're here today to talk about cybersecurity. And obviously, everywhere you turn in the media these days, we hear not only about cybersecurity, but almost a heightened sense of panic and tension around what is happening and what might happen.
Yes.
And so I really wanted to kind of unwind that conversation a little bit and talk about what is the definition of cybersecurity in general, and then what is the definition at Eli Lilly, and how does it fit into your company's overall business strategy?
Definitely. So when we think about the term cybersecurity, it's interesting because early on in the industry, as we were ramping up these cyber programs, many of us in the profession really didn't like the word cybersecurity, because I think what it did, it gave, I guess, insight to the electronic or the digital part of the work that we do. But there's an entirely separate side to that that wasn't really encompassed within cybersecurity. So typically, when you're looking at the definition of cybersecurity, you're looking at all things confidentiality, integrity, and availability as it relates to your information and your systems, and how do you ensure protection from a digital standpoint when it comes to CI and or A. What we as a profession have said that yes, there's a digital piece to this that we really have to make sure that we're protecting in this new age, but also with organizations that are still creating levels of paper, they have processes that they're using, they have different levels of technology. We have to look a little bit broader than just the cyber pieces. So at Lilly, we have taken an opportunity to say, yes, we have a very strong cyber component of what we do, but we also have this other side that really looks at business risk that actually relate to information, because that's the key for all of this. It relates to information. And so we have decided that we're not only going to talk about cyber, but how do we build strong processes around all things information, and how do we protect those things that are critical to our business. So I think we've broadened the terminology a little bit. We don't necessarily call our program a cyber program. We call it an information security program. And so when we look at the construct of what we have created here at Lilly, we have a couple different areas that you will see commonly across information security programs. We have a huge operations center, so this is called Cyberfusion for our organization. And we encompass within Cyberfusion is our incident response teams, our insider threat program, our threat intelligence programs. We have vulnerability management and adversary simulations that we do. And that operations center manages all of that. We have a group that deals with identity and access management, because there needs to be certain access to systems. And as we move towards more cloud technology, our stance around IAM is going to be very critical to that move. So that's another area within information security. We have an IS engineering and architectural team. So how are we architecting the controls for our environment? And then who actually does the what I call the flipping of the switches and turning of the knobs to make sure that that is engineered within our technology spaces? We also have a risk management group, and this is an exciting group because if you know, throughout the last, I want to say 20 years, about 7 or 8 years ago, we started to think of security programs more from a risk management lens and not necessarily a compliance exercise. How we started years ago was more compliance focused. So we have this new area that's being stood up, and I'm very proud of the work we do there from a risk management standpoint. And then last but not least, we do have an area that focuses mostly on our governance and our strategy, and ensuring that we are reporting upward effectively, that we are engaging with our peers. We do training and awareness. That's a part of our risk management group. I almost forgot that. So that's a part of that group. So that is the makeup at Lilly in terms of our corporate entity that we have. Also, to help us carry out security within our business, we have security advisors. And these are some amazing individuals that take the message of security and carry it into our business areas, implementing it within our business areas and ensuring that we have a cohesive plan from the top to the bottom. So that's the whole ecosystem of who we are at Lilly. As it relates to the business problem versus the technical problem, and we've been having this conversation for years in the industry, what is it really? And I think it's a combination of both, actually. But from the business perspective, I think the way that we have really engaged our leadership across Lilly, and I've seen this in other organizations as well, is the CISO becomes the translator. So I can't walk into a board meeting. I can't walk into a leadership meeting or a business function meeting and start to talk about all things encryption, all things related to firewalls. Are we going to have any rules versus any to, they don't want to hear that. So what they want to hear is, what is the impact to the business? So I become that person in the middle to say, I understand what we're doing technically, but let me explain to you how that's going to help you deliver on your mission within your specific area. So that's how we've been able to really talk about it from a business perspective, that I have to be that intermediary to be able to make sure that the business functions understand what we're doing, but primarily because they want to know, how is it going to help them run better? How are they going to be more secure? How are they going to deliver on their mission?
Right. And I think that's so critical. And I think that's a shift that's really just starting to happen at the major corporation level.
Yes.
That the idea that, business, the IT isn't in its own room with a locked door where all the computers set.
In the basement, because that's typically where we are.
Exactly. Exactly. When I first started my career, we didn't have the issues that one has to worry about today. And as I've watched personally, information technology and information security change, the idea of providing training to people like me in a corporation who I understand business, I understand risk, I understand strategy, but how do I impact what you do? How am I able to be accountable and aware and involved in those issues? How do you help people who are in management, who are in product management and accounting and all of the other pieces of the business know that and think about that?
Yeah, I think that we have to settle ourselves on some terminology that we used early in the tech industry. You always hear us talk about people, process, and technology. And I think as technologists, of course, we're going to align to the technology piece of that triad first, because we are geeks and we like that kind of stuff, right? But the reality is, the people component of what we do, to me, is the anchor to any strong security program. You can put all of the great processes you want to put in place. You can put all the technology that you want to put in place. But at the end of the day, those things are not 100% foolproof to the point where something is going to make it into the inbox of that person. And when it gets to that person, you want them to reflect on principles that you've taught them, to look for certain things in that email. Do I click? Do I not click? Do I send something back? Do I not send something back? They're making a judgment call based off of how you've trained and you've educated them. What I saw earlier in the industry is that we were not focusing enough on the training and awareness, but we were talking about all these great technology. How do we, roll out intrusion detection? How do we do all of these things? But we weren't talking about the people. And so I think one of the things that helps you turn the tide when it comes to security being more of a business problem versus a technical problem is to focus on the people element of what we do. Because when you really think about it, that may be the one area that becomes, and I don't like to use the term weakest link, but it's the most vulnerable. because I can, again, it's a judgment call that has to be made. Whereas in technology, we can configure that the way that we want it to be configured, and it operates the same way every time. People don't operate the same way every time. So from a training and awareness perspective, I think that that's critical and key to get those people on board to understand. One of the other techniques that I've used over the years is coming and talking to leadership before there's a problem. So when I come in and have a conversation with you as the leader of your space, and I say, tell me a little bit about your initiatives for the next year or two. Tell me a little bit about what your pain points are. What are the things that frustrate you about the technology or some of the security controls we might have put in place? And we get to have this dialogue outside of a crisis. Okay, because when you have it within a crisis, you're focusing on the crisis. You're not really focusing on the enablement of the business. So I always like to use that as a tool to continuously have this dialogue along the way, that we are now becoming a partner to our business areas, helping them deliver on their mission as securely as we possibly can. So that, and I think we can't underestimate that dialogue and that engagement prior to, because what happens is they now have a little bit more education around security, and they can now become the ambassadors within their spaces to talk to their teams in a different manner because they have now been educated appropriately. So I think that we have to hit it on both ends. Those individual conversations are important, but strong training and awareness programs are really, to me, the crux of a really good program from a security standpoint.
I love that, because I think that your idea that, people aren't programmed to respond exactly the same way twice, nor the right way every time.
Correct.
Is a really good way to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
As a business strategist, one of the things that has struck me over my entire career, but certainly in this past 15 years, mm-hmm. is not just the number of crises that happen, but the speed at which business is happening and changing on a regular basis. And the sheer amount of data on all topics that comes at any individual in business. From a technology point of view, how do you sort all of that out? How do you know what's important? How do you stop and say, well, in this international location, we need to think about these things, but in this business activity, it's these things?
I think it's a joint effort. No CISO can sit in a space and say that they know everything that's happening across the entire ecosystem. They know all of the laws that are changing globally. They know all of the impacts that's happening. It's not something that happens in a vacuum, right? So we have a really strong, robust team that really focuses, of course, on the technology pieces. We have some process pieces that we're looking at. We have people pieces that we're looking at. But we also have these other partners that are awesome. Our privacy team, our legal team that really looks at a lot of the regulations that will impact us in these different geographies. And so we rely on their expertise as well to provide us with those inputs. We have memberships into industry groups like the HISAC. So when we think about the health information sharing community and the way that we learn from each other, being a part of an organization like that gives us the ability to get more and more input. That's awesome. But then once we get all those inputs, we talked a little bit about the risk management team that we put in place. And so there are two things that kind of drive us when it comes to us taking a look at what should we do now, what should we do next, what can we do later, is that we're looking at it from a risk lens. What is the risk and the impact to Lilly? And that's going to kind of give it a little bit higher score because there's an immediate impact. We're going to see what it's doing to others in the industry. So our threat intelligence team has the ability to network with peers and other organizations to say, have you guys experienced this? If you did, how have you guys addressed it? Where has it fallen in your list of prioritization? So that's another input for us to determine whether we need to move or not. And then some of it is regulatory. Again, we look at the regulatory lens. If it's a mandate in a particular geography, that's going to also put it up a little bit higher on the prioritization list. But in all of those things, we have decided that the NIST cybersecurity framework is what we are going to align ourselves to, which is a collection of best practices when it comes to security and your operations and things of that nature. So we also are taking a look at what are some of those best practices that need to be there in order for us to be a strong program. So it's multiple things. It's the legal part, it's the regulatory part, it is what are our peers doing, it's what NIST says we should be doing from a standards perspective. And then we take all of those inputs and then just layer that risk piece on top what is the true impact to Lilly? And I think that gives me the ability to say, okay, now here's the 4 things we need to do right now based off of all of that. There's scoring that happens as it relates to our risk tolerance and things of that nature. So it's a robust program, but by no means is it a program that lives in my head. It actually is spread across multiple people and multiple inputs, and we really do rely on each other to help us assess the risk appropriately.
I think that it sounds like Lilly has taken a leadership role in understanding information security and how it is a part of the business, not how it's just a part of the organization. But the scope of what you talk about, from just the challenges to what you need in order to make the decisions that you need to be, it seems so large. And for many small businesses, they don't have the unlimited resources that a major company like Lilly might have to combat this issue. What advice do you have for them?
We underestimate the power in our peers. I just termed that. That's not something I used before, but there is power in our peer groups. And I think that smaller organizations that don't get the ability to have very robust budgets or large security teams, they need to be able to make those connections with their peer organizations. So you all may be able to collectively address an issue. Let me give you an example. So in Michigan, I'm from Michigan. And so in Michigan, I got the opportunity and the privilege to be one of the founding members of the Michigan Healthcare Cybersecurity Council. And this was an organization that was sanctioned by the governor of the state at the time. And he wanted us to take a more collective look at cyber as it relates to healthcare, because that's one of the critical infrastructures, right? So he wanted us to take a look at that. So I got a chance to not only be a founding member, but also the chair of that group for several years as we were building up. There's smaller organizations that were a part of that group. There were larger organizations that were a part of that group. And in a lot of instances, we had some smaller organizations come to us as the industry, collective, to say, we have an issue happening here. I only got 2 team members on my security team and I can't address this. I don't have the ability to do it. And several of us who had larger programs actually gave them some of our team members for a period of time to say, hey, cool. I can give you 2 or 3 people that'll come and they will help you address that issue. So I think being a part of a peer organization, there are peer organizations that are free to be a part of. Some of them you do have to pay, but some of them are free. And the Michigan Healthcare Cybersecurity Council at the time was a free entity. So it was a place where they could get the knowledge, get the help, get the support, and that helped them come along as well. We also, with those peer organizations, we don't necessarily see ourselves or see our engagement in these organizations as I consider to be a competitive advantage. I mean, we are here to protect the citizens of this particular state, not necessarily figure out what that other competitor is doing and see if we can one up them. It wasn't that kind of relationship. And so it created a really robust network of support that smaller organizations could leverage. We would give them copies of our policies so they didn't have to worry about doing the policy work. They would just kind of tweak it a little bit, but then they can implement it within their own spaces. In addition, if we want to look in the state of Indiana, so I'm new to Indiana, so I'm learning about all the resources that are there, but we do have an Indiana cybersecurity hub that's a part of our indiana.gov website for the state. So if you are within this region, within the state, you can actually go out there on the website and there's a ton of information about businesses and smaller organizations that are trying to tackle this thing called cybersecurity. So I would encourage them to go out there and peruse, take a look and see what's there and available to them.
I think that's a great suggestion. And I do know that a lot of chambers of commerce have cybersecurity commissions or councils within their organizations.
Yes.
And that's a really good resource as well. The work that we do is an international focus. And I know that many times businesses are a little afraid to engage internationally because they just don't know what to expect. And I think that these industry groups can help set the stage, can help answer those questions, and can help share best practices. So I think that's an excellent idea. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit at this point. I want to set this up a little bit. First of all, I think that predicated on the idea of the speed of business, it's breathtaking some days how fast things change. And that impacts the kind of skill sets people need in order to be successful. But I want to talk about your background a little bit. Somebody shared with me that you started out as an architect major before you moved into IT and software. As a English major who became a business person, I think that having that different construct before you start looking at something gives you a different set of filters to look at things through. Can you talk a little bit about how you think that your starting out in architecture and moving into software helped you build your filters? And then what I really want to eventually move into is the idea of workforce development.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it was a journey to say the least. And I can say initially when I decided to make the shift from architecture, I was in my third year, so I was a junior. My family thought I was absolutely crazy. Like, what are you doing? This is not what you always wanted to be an architect. Why are you doing this now? But it made sense for me. And I think that what I had to do is I did some reflection at the time, and I was trying to figure out what really was driving me from an architecture standpoint. Was it more about the buildings and the designs, or was it more about the problem solving? And I found that what really drove me in that was the problem solving. And so as we started to do more computer aided design at that time, and that was relatively new to the industry, I got really excited about this computer component to what we do. So much so to the point where I decided, okay, I don't think I want to be an architect anymore. I want to move over into these computers because I get to solve problems. I want to solve like some really cool problems. So I did make that shift. And I think that it was a really great shift for me to make. As you can see, it really has fueled my entire career from that point forward. And as I've collected experiences along the way, I can say at the time, I don't know if I really understood how they were going to all connect together, but they did eventually all connect together. So I can say that I'm probably one of those folks that I use every single one of my degrees every day, whereas some might not be able to say that. And again, like I said, along the way, I don't know if I had it in my mind that this is what it was going to turn into. I couldn't walk into my career and say, I think I'm going to be a CISO. There was no such thing. CISOs didn't even exist back then. So from that perspective, I just kind of morphed into to who I am. But in terms of the skill sets that really undergird that whole belief around problem solving, I think that is critical when it comes to cybersecurity. Most of us are closeted, kind of 007. We're going to investigate kind of people. We like to dig for the answer, that type of thing. And so I think that is a skill set that we, or at least I, brought into my computer career initially. And I think the inquisitive nature, I'm quite inquisitive and I do ask a lot of questions. Sometimes people like it, sometimes they don't. But it's really my way of trying to understand the thought process behind what we do. And so there's a psychology piece that goes into being a great cybersecurity professional that I think we underestimate. I'm always the one trying to figure out, okay, we have this exposure. This person clicked on this. Why did they do what they did? Because if I can figure out why they did it, I can design a control that will stop it before they even get to that point. So I'm always digging around the why someone is doing something or making a decision and things of that nature. So I think that's a skill set, again, that was brought into, my computer career. As you can see from a communication standpoint, that is one thing that I have to do all the time. I probably spend, 60% of my time being the evangelist for all things security within Lilly and even within the industry, being able to highlight some of the things that are important and I'm passionate about and some things that are important to me. The communication piece cannot be underestimated. Again, successful CISOs in my mind can talk on both ends of the spectrum. So you can talk purely technical when you need to, but when you walk in a boardroom, you can talk totally different to our board members who don't understand technical environments. So with that being said, I think that's another skill set that I brought into that particular career, which is a little different than most technical people. Most technical people we don't want to do all of that talking and interfacing with people, but I kind of like it because it helps me figure out what is this business problem that's happening over here? How do I ensure that security is there for them to be enabled appropriately? So it's back to the whole solving a problem again. The solutions are just different depending on what kind of problem I'm looking at.
And again, it moves you right back to the idea that it's not just an IT process, but it's a business process. Yes. And I really, really like that. So putting all of this in context, how should universities like mine, Indiana University,
Yes.
but also community colleges and even high schools,
Yes.
how should we think about the skills that we're teaching, the challenges that we're giving to our students to prepare them, not necessarily to just work in IT, but to be a contributor, to be that aware, involved, and accountable in the business problem.
Yes. So I've been given a wonderful opportunity over the years to work with a few universities. They've asked me to step in and assist their curriculum boards as they're looking at the different curriculums for their cyber programs and things of that nature. So that would be one recommendation. The more that universities, high schools, whether it is a community program that is encouraging STEM or whatever the case is, the more you can bring practitioners into the space, the better. So I think that doing that with the universities, we were able as practitioners, and they got like a group of us together, wasn't just myself, and had almost like a summit, like tell it, here's our curriculum, here's the syllabus or the syllabi for all of the classes, here's what we're teaching, here's what we want them to walk out of the room with. As a professional and a practitioner, does this sound right? Does this look right? Are we missing something? So we were able to work with those universities to help them design a more robust curriculum that will assist with the education of the students. But the other part of that is it's about the internships as well, because what I found years ago, we were teaching theory of security. So it's great to understand the theory that's within the book, but we also have to give people the ability to get the hands-on experience. So having lab environments where you can simulate certain things and they can actually stretch those skills out and learn, I think that all organizations need to be able to do that. So whether you have the resources to do it within your own organization or you partner with others to do it, I think that there's ways that we can make that happen where the students get that hands-on approach. But when we look at students that are younger, one of the things that I think we don't do enough of is we don't expose kids and young enough in order for them to kind of grasp a hold of the possibilities of who they could become when it comes to STEM. And so I also had the opportunity to work with some elementary schools where I'm showing them that, hey, I work in technology and here's what I do. And I'm showing them in the third, fourth, fifth grade so they can get to the point where becomes normal for them and they start to get interested in it. So I think that there are a couple of leadership groups and a couple of industry groups that do focus on kids. So the more we can get that STEM curriculum in front of them, the more we can get the possibilities of who they can become in front of them, the more the likelihood that they're going to select the career down the line. I know as an African American, what has always challenged me is that in our industry, it's not like we're overrun with people who look like me. So we're still kind of an anomaly and this unicorn, if you will, to people. But I have also made it a personal goal of mine to make sure that I put myself in spaces where little girls or little boys who look like me can see someone that has actually made it to that level. So they can possibly say, coming off of the inauguration, I'm feeling really good right now. But I'm saying just they get a chance to see what they possibly can become. And I think that that's always important as well. So the more you can get role models in front of kids, exposing them to the potential careers that they could have, and also giving internship opportunities to some of our college students and maybe even some of our high school students. I think all of that engagement really helps with the selection of a STEM career long-term.
Excellent, because you pretty much answered my next question,
Okay.
which but that's okay, because I want to talk a little bit more about diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Sure.
because I think that like you, I am coming off of a high from the inauguration. It's so nice to see a female, an African American, an Indian American, step into such a prestigious role.
Yes.
But I don't want that to be the ending point of the discussion. I don't want anybody to say, "Well, we're done." And I think that that's the risk that we run, in industry from where I come, and then being in academia where I'm at now. I go into those boardrooms or into the meeting rooms or even into the lunch rooms, and I don't see the diversity. I don't see it in a lot of corners, but I especially don't see it in the STEM areas. And I think that there needs to be a louder conversation. There needs to be a more open conversation about how do we do this? You know, you are an anomaly. And I love the fact that, you know, we have a strong African-American woman in the role at Lilly who is leading the charge in all of this. How do we get that message out?
Yeah, I think that we all have a responsibility to see past our uncomfortableness. I think that one of the things that I love about working for Lilly and what we experienced over the summer of last year was multiple opportunities for us to be able to have these uncomfortable conversations that we're not used to having in corporate environments. And Lilly really did give us a platform to be able to do that. They encouraged us to do that, and we did it in spades in our organization, right? So I think continuing to have those dialogues be available, I think it's important. And to continue to leverage those. But then in an industry perspective, I have taken a different turn from an industry standpoint. I think that we have stayed away from that topic as well in these industry groups. We don't see the diversity that we need to see in most of them. And I walk into these security conferences or technology conferences and I find myself looking like, where is someone who looks like me or a woman? Like I need to find them. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. So as they're pulling us onto these advisory boards for these industry groups, I think it's incumbent upon us to all start pushing the envelope around diversity, equity, and inclusion and what we're going to do differently. So I look at myself 27 years being in my career, and I remember walking into my first real job out of college, as I call it, and looking for someone who looked like me, and there was no one who looked like me. Not even on the male side, there was no one who looked like me. And so trying to figure out how am I going to traverse my career, how am I going to move, and how am I going to be developed if I don't find affinity anywhere is something that we still see happening almost 30 years later. So are we tired of the conversation yet? I am. I want the action, right? So some of the things that I have recommended to a couple of groups that I'm a part of is because we've talked about mentoring programs and for minorities and women, and I had to chime in and say, we don't need any more mentoring programs. That's not what's hindering us when it comes to giving opportunity to people in these spaces. What's hindering us is lack of access. So if we are sitting in these spaces where we are the hiring manager or someone from our team is a hiring manager and they have this really great role open, are we being very intentional around looking at women and minority candidates the same way we look at other candidates? And in some instances in the industry, we have not. So I think we need to change that. Access and sponsorship is what is going to push us over the edge when it comes to that. Mentoring programs are awesome. Not saying that they're not good, but they have not proven to be the mechanism that has allowed us to grow the population in the industry. So what is lacking there? Someone giving someone a chance. Somebody gave me a chance,
Right.
Okay,
Right.
multiple times. And most of the time, those individuals did not look like me. But they gave me a chance to say, we know her skills, we know her experiences, we know what she can bring to the table. We're going to give her a chance to go into that role. We're going to give her a chance to become vice president at 32. I mean, somebody gave me a chance, you know? Yep. So we have to now start deciding that we're willing to give that person the chance. And until we get to that point, we're not going to be able to move this at all.
Yeah, I love that. I had somebody the other day, we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and the definition, I think people don't have a solid definition. And I think somebody said to me that diversity is about inviting people to the dance. Inclusion is about getting them on the dance floor. And I think that was such an awesome metaphor because, you know, just because I open the door doesn't mean that people are going to start dancing. It's asking people and giving them the chance, making them feel welcome, and then taking them and going onto the dance floor.
Yes.
I just really, for some reason, that just resonated with me because as a woman, I certainly have dealt with some of those inclusion issues over the years, but not to the degree that other groups have. And I think that it's incumbent on all of us to find our voice in this and to do something, to take action, to dance together. And I think that
I love that dancing. I love it. The intentionality, I think, is one thing that we have to also focus on. Diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't happen by happenstance. It just doesn't
Right.
organically solve itself because that's just not how we're wired as people, right? So
Right.
I think it has to be an intentional effort for
I
us to be
agree.
able to address some of these things. My hope, because I won't be working until I'm 105, right? So my hope is as I look towards retirement, is that I have done enough to replicate myself in this industry where the next set of CISOs that are women, that are Black, don't have to endure some of the things that I have had to endure, or some of my other sister colleagues who have also been in this seat. That's my hope. But in order for us to do that, it's going to take some real tangible efforts. It's going to take courage because depending on how your organization is structured, they may not want you to push the envelope with minority recruitment. They may not want you to push the envelope when it comes to women in leadership. Are you going to stand on what is right, or are you going to stand on what is comfortable? And so what I have chosen to do around the spaces of diversity, equity, inclusion is not worry about so much the rightness of it all, but I'm okay with the uncomfortableness. I'm okay with us being uncomfortable as we move through this process, because you are sometimes going to have to go against the grain. You will, because it's just not the norm. Are you willing to make that sacrifice as a leader? I think that I am. I'm willing to make that sacrifice because if I
Yeah.
don't, it's not going to organically happen.
Right. And if you don't, if I don't, who will?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that that's fabulous. And that's a really good place for us to kind of wrap this up. You know, I look at the world so different than when I graduated from the MBA program back in 1908 in the mid 80s. And so much opportunity exists, but there are still so many challenges. If you were to give a piece of advice to somebody who's in a big business or a small business starting their career on how do you tackle these big issues, whether they are cybersecurity issues, information security issues, or diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, how do you do that?
This is really where mentoring really should drive a lot of that. You know, find yourself some really great mentors that and coaches, because you're going to need both, and they're not the same thing. That's what people have to realize. So they're not the same thing. And then along the way, as you are coached through certain scenarios, as you are mentored in terms of your behaviors and how you should show up as a leader, you then will eventually find yourself in a position to have sponsors and advocates who speak your name in spaces that you don't even have access to, where they are brokering deals, not necessarily for your career progression, but for the support of the program that you are responsible for. And that is what happened with me, is I had really good advocates and sponsors who took my speech into spaces where I wasn't, and they were helpful in getting me to move the needle. So I think don't underestimate the power of people that can assist you in your career, but you have to reach out. You have to go and seek them out. We're not just going to drop in your lap and say, hey, I'm here to mentor you. You have to be able to broker those relationships, but don't underestimate it. We are not in this journey alone. Professionally, and we have to get ourselves out of that mindset that we're just going to do our thing. You always are going to have to rely on other people, especially in a role of a CISO. I always have to rely on other people to carry out my mission. Mentors, sponsors, coaches, advocates, make sure you have a good solid team of what I call your board of directors.
I think excellent advice to end this. Thank you so very much for spending your time with me today. I look forward to continuing the conversation elsewhere.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
All right. Thank you.